At this time, I would like to introduce our presenters. Jack Barber is a senior business consultant with XOTech. Jack brings 30 years of experience during his tenure at National Instruments, most of which focused on building the NI system integration business as the Alliance Program Manager. In his Alliance role, he recognized the critical importance of assisting Alliance partners to gain the business acumen necessary to manage and grow their organizations. He also spent 7 years in NI Global Services and Support to deliver large-scale solutions to NI's most strategic and demanding customers. Steve Conkergood is a senior business consultant with XOTech. Steve enjoyed a diverse engineering and management career for 40 years. He has been successful as an entrepreneur and inventor, holding North American patents across a range of subjects. Early in his career, he worked in manufacturing organizations and received extensive training in all aspects of project management. He has been responsible for teams in engineering and structural design, product development, quality assurance, process management, field applications, and monitoring. Now I'll turn it over to our distinguished presenters. Welcome, Jack and Steve.
Hello, everyone. For those of you who are not familiar with XOTech, we are the only company that focuses exclusively on business consulting for the control system integration industry. In addition to being well known for our collaboration with CSIA to found and develop the CSIA best practices and certification program, we do offer a variety of consulting engagements to meet our clients' needs. Today, CSIA has asked us to talk about people management. So I'll turn it over to Steve to start us off.
Okay, thanks, Jack, and thanks, Denise, for the introduction. So as XOTech provides coaching and mentoring and consulting for system integrators around the world, one of the most common topics that we get questions and challenges from our owners and leaders is the subject of people management. And this isn't particularly surprising because these system integration organizations are founded and led by very strong technical professionals, but most of us have very little training on the topic of specifically people management. And of course, there's an awful lot we could talk about under people management, and it would take way more than 1 hour webinar to cover even a slice of these topics. But what we chose today was to talk about how to build strong teams within your organization, because that's, in our experience, one of the most critical aspects of effective people management. So the first aspect in creating a good team culture within your organization is to think about the culture that you're building within your company. And I love this quote. This is from a book you're going to see a reference to later that was written by the chief people officer of Google. You have a culture, whether it's intentional or not. And so it's quite important that you and your leadership team think about defining that culture and teaching the culture to the people who work within the company. And then onwards, if you think more about that topic, you'll realize that you should actually be hiring people that fit within that culture and going to help you build that culture that you intentionally are trying to create. And so at this point, it's a little bit unusual in a webinar, but I'm going to just pause for a moment and ask you a question. Can you define the culture within the company where you work now? Just 2 or 3 keywords. Think about, okay, jot them down or mentally make a note of, okay, what words would you think about to define the culture for your company? And then after this webinar is done and you've heard our material and you're thinking more about the topic, I want you to think about who in your organization would agree with those words that you actually chose to think about your culture. If you went around the rest of the size of your company, your software people, your hardware people, your accounting people, your management team, would you find consistency? Would you find that the people actually have some common sense of what the culture in the organization is? And depending on whether you're more towards the yes or more towards the no there, then that's going to be a foundation for you to think about, okay, how are we going to build an organization, a culture that puts all of the pieces of our organization together? How do all these different groups within the company fit? Are they working effectively and well together? Okay, the next aspect of thinking about the people within your culture and within your company is think about this little spectrum that I've sketched out at the bottom. On the left-hand side, you have machines. It's sort of an interesting way to think about an organization build-up. Okay, on one end you have machines. They generate some output, but they work pretty specifically within their own scope. They do what they're designed to do. They don't adapt themselves typically. I mean, some smart machines are getting better, but machines are pretty much towards the static side. They don't really change situations, or when the requirements change, the machine has to have somebody come along and make it a different machine to make it fit those new requirements. Then at the very other end of the spectrum, you have the owners. These are the people who plan for a better future state of the company. They're constantly looking for change, for improvements, for growth. These are the people that are really driving the business to the next level. And somewhere in the middle, we have this group of people we call the employees. As humans, we all have enormous innate potential for growth, but unless we're operating within a framework and particularly a culture that allows us to grow and encourages us to grow, we're not typically going to see that. And so the goal of the company culture is to move the employees more towards the right-hand side, towards the ownership side of that spectrum, to make your employees behave and really feel and contribute as if they were owners building the results of the company and for a better future state. So some tips about culture that we've gleaned from our experience with other system integrators and from reading and things like that. I really like this. I think it's Google's culture is a good place to go and study if you don't have any other references at the moment. They're quite public about what they do for culture. I mean, they're not in our business, of course. They're not a system integrator specifically the way we are, but still, it's because they're successful and because they publish quite a bit about their culture. And one of the key tips there is that recruiting, when they're recruiting for people, there's 2 million people a year apply, and only 0.25% of them are accepted. So just think about that aspect of getting the right people into your organization. Are they going to fit the culture? Are they going to be the right team contributors? If you, now I don't think most of us can get to 0.25% of all the people who apply are actually accepted our organizations. That's probably not realistic for us. But in principle, think about that you really want to be making sure that the people you do hire are the ones that are going to help you build the company to where you want it to go, not just filling seats with warm bodies, as we sometimes talk about. Another interesting aspect of culture I think I would pass on is this particular author, Richard Burt, who works at the University of Chicago, has done a lot of work on organizations and cultures. And his one summary of a lot of his work is that innovation, which is something we all like to think about and speak about and believe that our companies are somewhat innovative, it happens where you create intentional overlaps between groups in an organization. So if you have this is an example that Google uses. If you have a software team and a hardware team, there might not be inherent in the organization a lot of overlap between those groups. But if you intentionally create overlap, and that could be a coffee station, that could be a social event, that could be some set of meetings that you've created to make sure that those two groups do overlap, you will cause more innovative culture to occur within your organization. And I thought that was a really good tip. I've seen that in practice. I've somewhat lived with that in my organizations, And so I think that's a good suggestion to do that. The other one that's quite common in many of the organizations I've been involved in is lunch and learns. People bring in speakers from all sorts of different fields and say, okay, we're going to buy lunch, we're going to all get together, and we're going to learn something. Well, one of the most powerful examples of that I've seen done is in the early stages of my company, Advanced Measurements. We got every person in the organization to do a lunch and learn about themselves. They had to do some sort of a presentation. It didn't have to be a PowerPoint, but it could be some sort of a presentation that reflected something about their interests, their travel, their community, their vision. And that was very helpful. And when I say everybody, I mean everybody. The people who wire the panel boards in the back shop of your organization, maybe, those people are part of the list of who makes up your culture. And so it's important to move them up into that public sort of view as well. Okay, I think that's my portion. On to Jack and some talks about getting alignment within your.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. So let's talk a little bit about how you go from having a good culture to gaining alignment with that culture and gaining alignment within your teams. So in Gino Wickman's book called Traction, he devotes an entire section of what he calls his entrepreneurial operating system, EOS, to the people component of your business. And as he aptly states, to run a successful business, you need to surround yourself with good people. In order to do so, he advocates two things: getting the right people and making sure they are in the right seats. Now, the right people are the ones who share your company's core values, much the way Steve has already started talking about. They fit and they thrive in your culture. They are people you enjoy being around and who make your organization a better place to be. So they're getting to that. They're more like owners than just machines, so to speak. Secondly is make sure those people are in the right seat, means that each employee is operating within his or her area of greatest skill and passion and inside your organization, and that their roles and responsibilities fit their unique abilities. When a person is operating in this place, they feel energized rather than drained, and most of all, that person has a passion to go further and strive for improvement, to operate beyond just their job role, the machinery of their job, and to take on how to improve the organization. When the person is operating in this manner, they're in the right seat. So determine if you have the right people, the first component, the right people. The Traction methodology offers what they call a people analyzer. And this is something you can download, the template from their website. It's like the one that's shown here. And in order to use it, you do three things. You start by putting your people's name in the left-hand columns. You then across the top, you can see they've put in examples of core values, so that would be your core values. And then you rate each person on a kind of plus-minus scale or halfway in between on whether or not they adhere to the core values. Now, ideally, you're shooting for an organization in which you have surrounded yourself with 100% of the right people and you have pluses in all the boxes, but don't get caught up in perfection if you use this methodology to begin with. Use it as a way to benchmark your organization and establish kind of a minimum standard, and then work to improve the alignment over time. So our recommendation on using the People Analyzer tool is to start with your leadership team and actually have them people analyze, so to speak, each other. This will accomplish two objectives. First, it'll validate your core values. For instance, if you are all weak in one particular value, you should question whether or not it's a valid core value at all. Secondly, you will see if someone in your leadership team is below the bar. While this can be a tough situation, it does, and it doesn't come up often because you probably promoted your leaders based on their alignment. But if there is that misalignment and they don't represent your core values, most of the time by pointing this out to the person, that person can have an opportunity to improve his performance according to alignment with those core values. Or sometimes once that becomes apparent that they aren't aligned with the core values, he or she will opt out. Anyways, once your managers know the expectations according to your core values, they then can hold their own people accountable to them. Next, then you can have your leadership team do people analysis with everyone in their organization. So have each manager share those results in one-on-one sessions, and this will really bring the tool to life. So more this is less of a group effort and more as a one-on-one management tool. You can use it in your quarterly performance reviews or annual performance reviews. However you do that, you should also take a look in not only what the employee has actually done or not done, but do an evaluation of have they represented the core values of the organization. And let them analyze the managers as well. It should be a two-way street, and use that as an opportunity to reinforce your core values and your alignment to those core values. And last but not least, if you are struggling with a personnel problem, you can use the people analyzer there too to determine whether or not it's I'll call right person issue. If the person's just not a fit in your organization, this can be helpful to do that. If they are a good fit in your organization, then it may be whether or not they're in the right seat, which we'll talk about next. So let's talk about right seats. That means that the people are not only the right people, but they're in a position in the organization where they can use their unique abilities that fit and fulfill the roles and responsibilities of their role. The goal here is to construct an organization that will lift your company to the next level. To create this structure in Wickman's book, Traction, he recommends that you build what he calls an accountability chart. This is a supercharged version of an organizational chart, and when it's completed, it will help your leaders clearly grasp their own roles and responsibility, and then in turn be able to do that with respect to their employees. Some ground rules given for defining accountability is it must be forward-looking. From your existing business, it's more about where you want to be as an organization, so don't get hung up in your current organizational chart, but think about the accountability in your organization, where your organization needs to go. Detach yourself from current roles and responsibilities, and elevate your decisions to make the best long-term decision for the greater good of the organization. So let me orient you a little bit to an accountability chart. The fundamental belief is that there are only three major functions within a business, regardless of whether you're a startup business or a large organization. So in those three aspects, as shown here, are sales and marketing, operations, and finance and administration. If any of the three of these are weak, the organization isn't as effective as it could be. So by creating an accountability chart according to these functions, you can ensure that there is ultimately one person responsible for each of these major functions. Not that one person has to do all the work, just that one person is ultimately responsible for the results. When more than one person is accountable, then nobody is, basically. So there are two other essential roles that must be recognized in an organization, and they're listed, shown here in the diagram as well. There's the integrator and the visionary. So the integrator is the person who harmonizes the major functions in the organization, so essentially rides herd, so to speak, over those three functions we talked about. Because when you have strong people in those major functions, there tends to be kind of a friction, but a healthy friction between them. So the integrator's role is really to blend that energy together to help drive the company forward as a whole. And finally, there's the visionary, who honestly couldn't be more different than the integrator. It's in small to mid-sized companies, the visionary is typically the owner or the founder. The visionary has, many new ideas on a weekly basis. Most of which, whether they're not so great or the timing's not right, Usually they are the ones that come up with those key ideas, one a week or one a month, whatever it is, that really drives the organization forward from a vision perspective. That's the name visionary. And that's why visionaries are invaluable. The integrator tends to focus on making sure the organization runs well, where the visionary is looking to the future. And those kind of roles, as you can imagine, run in tandem. The visionary typically is very creative, often is a great solver of those big, ugly problems, not the everyday practical ones that the integrator fixates on and make sure that the organization runs as efficiently as possible. Okay, so the last aspect of traction that I wanted to cover off before handing it back to Steve as far as gaining alignment is, okay, so you've got the right people and you've got them in the right seats. The final step in the gaining alignment is to make sure that they get it, want it, and have the capacity to do it, so-called GWC. So get it simply means that they truly understand their role, the systems that are involved, the pace of that role, and how that job really comes together. So they get the role, they get the responsibilities that they of that position. Secondly, they want it. So that means they genuinely like their job and want to fulfill on the responsibilities based on fair compensation. Note, if you feel like you have to constantly motivate someone or have to overpay them to do that job, or beg a person to do that job, the reality is they probably don't want it. Sometimes it may be their ego or your hopes that will lead you to kind of that hope that they want to do it or believe that they want to do it. But if they fundamentally don't want to do it, they're never going to have the spark, no matter how effective a manager you are. You can't force somebody to want it. So if that's the case, stop beating your head against the wall. Find somebody who actually wants to do that role, and the difference will be immediately apparent. And if the person that's currently in that role is still the right person in the organization, then find out what they can do in the organization that they really want and be passionate about it. And the last thing, which shouldn't be underestimated, is their capacity to do it. That means they have the time as well as the mental, physical, and emotional capacity to do the job. So it's not simply about skills. Sometimes a position might require a commitment of 55 hours a week, but the person may only be committed to working 40 hours a week or only have 40 hours a week of bandwidth to commit to that particular role because of other responsibilities. So you need to recognize whether or not they have the capacity to do it. It certainly does include their level of intellect, skill, and knowledge as well. You have to assess whether the person simply has the capacity to do the job itself. As you can see here with the People Analyzer tool, it also can be expanded so managers can have frank conversations with your employees about not only do they fit the core values, but do they GWC, do they get it, do they want it, and have the capacity to do the role that they've been assigned to do. All right, so that's some whole logistics and thoughts about how to gain alignment within your organization. With that, I'll turn it back over to Steve to say, talk about, okay, now that you have the culture and you have the alignment, how do you form effective teams to go out and get the tasks that your organization needs done?
Okay, thanks, Jack. So this is the third section of the subject material for today, which we call Managing Effectively. And in our experience with system integrators and owners' teams, the ability for a company to create successful teams is often one of the biggest factors that drives success in the whole organization. I suppose if you're a sole proprietor, then you can not take this into account. But if you want to grow, if you want your organization to go from 1 to 2, or 2 to 4, or 4 to 8, or 250 to 500, then teamwork is one of the critical aspects of effective output for the organization. And as a reference book, one of our favorites on this particular topic is by Patrick Lencioni. It's a pretty mature book. It was written in 2002, but we just find it, like I personally, it's one of my all-time favorites because it's relatively short. It's easy to read. It's not, you don't need a PhD. It's all material that you can learn and put into practice quite effectively. So there's probably many of you out there who have read it. If you have, go and read it again because the material really is quite potent. It's quite effective. And there's a single sentence in the introduction to the book that summarizes it so well. This is theoretically uncomplicated. Like building teams is not rocket science, but it's much, much harder to put it into practice day after day within your organization than what it seems. And so it does take work and it does take focus in order to get successful on this topic. The first sort of foundational layer of building good teamwork in the company is trust. Building trust is something you have to have if you're going to have your team work well together. And I guess that might be self-evident, but it's worth focusing on as a topic to say, okay, before we go on and try and do all the other steps, do we really have the team opening up to each other? Are they available? Are they going to feel committed to each other to work as a team? And an example that's pretty germane these days is when you go to a meeting of a team on some particular topic, it's kind of common to have people with laptops, people with phones, and they're clicking away and making notes, and they appear to be attending the meeting, but you're never sure whether they're taking notes for the meeting, which is perfectly legitimate. Many people take notes electronically, of course, but there's often a sense that your people who are supposed to be focused on the topic and the agenda of the meeting are perhaps planning their performance reviews, or perhaps, say, worst case, they're checking Facebook. So that's a good example of trust, where you have to make sure that everyone appears to be putting the team's priority higher than their own. And you have to learn to be open and honest with each other on topics like that and say, hey, Fred or Sue or Sally or Bill, we're not seeing your engagement here at the meeting table. We've got an agenda. We've got some decisions to make. We've got important topics here. Are you really part of this team? Are you really committed at this instance? So that's a pretty common example that we see here. Once you feel like you've done the work to build the foundation, to create the trust, it can almost lend to a sort of sense of euphoria. It's like, wow, this is great. We're working so well together. I really like these people. They're engaged and they're committed. But be a little cautious there because the hard work is still to come. There's 4 more layers to this triangle to make effective teamwork. So trust is the foundation, and we're going to go on and look at the layers above that come next. Mastering conflict is something that there's a wide range of skills and degrees of comfort with this, and I can tell you personally, I'm not that comfortable in the topic of conflict. It is inevitable. When you have teams working on projects with demanding clients, demanding performance requirements, it's not all just going to be easy and all roses. So conflict will happen. And I think you can see many of the bullets here. These are topics that come from Patrick's book and from our own experience. I'm not going to speak to every single one of those, but what I would say is that if you or your management team is not particularly comfortable and skilled at conflict, then find someone within the organization that is better at it than you are, because there is a pretty big range of some people, some managers in particular, are very good at managing conflict. And so use those people. If those people aren't part of the actual project team, but you're watching the evolution of this team and the progress of the team's results, and you're sensing that you have some conflict that's unresolved, then go find someone. And I guess if there isn't anybody in your organization who you think is really good at it, then you can even consider bringing in a coach or someone from the outside to try and help you with this. But don't ignore it. If you ignore this subject and say, oh well, it's I don't feel comfortable with it, I don't like to deal with it, we'll just get our work done and all go home at the end of the day, you won't be successful in building really good teams. You won't get the optimum results that you want for your company by ignoring this topic. You just really have to find the skills and the methods and practice that it takes to become better at this over time. The third level of the triangle and moving upwards towards our ultimate results is called achieving commitment. And this is, you can see the relationship between trust and then conflict and then commitment. If you build trust and then you manage your conflict, you will start to move towards the point where, people are really bought in. They have clear, unambiguous outcomes in mind, or the deliverables, the sense, the plan of how we're going to get there on this project, what this team is really setting out to do. Those clarity will start to be formed. Again, it's not going to happen on its own unless you're intentional about this and say, okay, are we all really clear? If we pause for a moment and say, does everybody understand the goal? Does everybody understand the plan? What questions are there? What risks are there? What obstacles are we going to face? Those steps are required to be done quite explicitly. You can't just blow over them and say, oh, well, it'll all just work out. So think about this commitment of the people who are on the team. Do they all actually buy in? Are they just saying that they understand and just saying that they feel good about it? Or can you measure that a bit better? Can you get a true sense that they're going to be all in for whatever's required? And of the material on this particular topic, my own experience is that this bullet where it says end discussions with understanding and decisions, that is one of the key skills that most teams don't bother to implement. Everybody gets to the end of a meeting, everybody wants to get on to the next topic, whether that's coffee break or the next agenda item that they have on their to-do list. And it's very easy to leave a meeting or some sort of a review process with misunderstandings. And it's important to build the skills around explicitly saying, okay, who's documenting this? Who's got ownership of being clear that this is what we're all going to do in the next time interval? So that's a skill I would encourage you all to practice and build within your teams. Moving up again, the title line is embracing accountability. It's more and more talked about in organizations. People say they want accountability. They understand that that's a requirement. It's something that leaders sort of inherently have, but we're all talking more about in management these days. It's much more difficult to get to in practice again. If just again think about it, if you didn't have that foundation layer, if you didn't have trust, if you didn't have engagement, if you didn't have clarity, could you really have accountability? It's hard to see how that's going to work. So embrace this. Say we want to be open with each other. We want to confront issues and say this is the thing that's holding us back from achieving our results on this project or on this team. So my encouragement is don't fake it. It has to be brought into the open. It has to be talked about quite actively in order to make it work. And really this is quite commonly a leadership issue. It seems like it might be a management role. It might be something where you're saying, oh, my general manager is the one that documents my plans for me, or my chief operating officer is the one that says, yes, we're going to actually get this work done this quarter. So it seems like it might be management's role or management's job, but it's not. This is truly a leadership issue within your organization. If your leaders are demonstrating accountability, then it will flow downwards through the organization, and the rest of the organization will feel comfortable that, okay, we can have accountability without necessarily blame. We can have failure without all being fired. We can be accountable to achieving what we want in our jobs and in our teams and in our company. And really, it starts with the leadership making sure that they are really demonstrating, and not just lip service, but are your leaders. And again, if you're the leader of your organization and you're not knowledgeable or you're not skilled in this, it's not a failure on your behalf. I mean, many of us, particularly those of us who went through engineering schools, we didn't learn these topics, right? This is not something that's part of our wheelhouse, as the cliche goes. This is something you might have to learn to do and learn about in order to become skilled at. So then the pinnacle of the triangle, the last step in getting traction from your teams is to focus on the actual results. All of the 4 preceding layers lead up to do this, and like the others, there's no sense in trying to focus on the results. There's no sense in having a Gantt chart that says this is what we're all going to achieve on this project and ignoring the 4 topics that come before this. It's just not going to work for you. Everyone wants to see results. Everybody likes to have that sense of accomplishment of, oh yeah, we brought the project in on time, or we're ahead of schedule, we're under budget or something like that. But the results are really the outcome of those first 4 layers. And it's the true measure of whether your team is actually on track and delivering is okay, we started with a goal, we started with a plan, we're meeting those results, we're accomplishing that plan because we have those other 4 layers in the triangle. So that's the sort of summary. I encourage you to read Patrick's book. Patrick's quite a prolific author. He has many other books as well, but The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. After you've read the book, it seems clear. It's relatively easy to understand the material, but it will take work. Don't expect that in 1 week or 1 quarter or 1 meeting or 1 lunch and learn that you're just going to have a big improvement in the way your teams work. Take it on as a topic, take it on as a subject, and say, okay, if we are going to work in teams, let's make sure we're effective. Okay, over to Jack for our final set of slides.
Yeah, Steve, and I appreciate you covering, because that's a big topic area. And the one other thing I would recommend about the book, and there's a version of the book called the Field Guide that's also interesting. I think the book itself has some actual examples and exercises for you to go to, and the Field exercise book version of it has even more, almost like becoming an instructor of this. So, it'll put actual action items that you can go to work on with teams and exercises to take them through to help build stronger teams. Okay, so I want to move on to our 4th topic. I do realize, and I just want to acknowledge, we have gotten a few questions. Please keep those coming. For flow's sake, I'd say let's just hold those to the end, and I'll cover off this last component. So we've talked about culture, we've talked about organizational alignment, we've talked about teams, and then I want to share just a few thoughts on managing individuals. This last piece, my guess you're pretty familiar with the classic techniques of managing people, things like SMART goals, but I wanted to provide some additional perspective based on what's called the Situational Leadership model that was developed by Ken Blanchard and Paul Hershey as part of their work on management of an organizational behavior. In this work, they describe techniques which have been time-tested and adopted and proven to help managers around the world. This situational model in particular goes beyond just goal setting. It focuses on what employees need, when they need it, so you can accelerate their development and create a more productive and passionate workplace. So let me describe this to you. So in this model, what the manager is asked to do is diagnose the individuals that they're managing with respect to competency and commitment to determine the situation. So in case of what they call D1 situation, the individual is assessed to have relatively low competency as far as accomplishing the goal, but high commitment to doing it. That is, they are willing to do the task, but they lack the specific skills required for the job. They are a novice, but enthusiastic. The second case, individuals are more able to do the task. However, they're not sufficiently motivated to do the job, and therefore ultimately kind of unwilling or reluctant to do the task. So a manager should assess if that's the particular instance why a goal may not be being achieved. Third, individuals are experienced and they are able to do the task but lack the confidence to take on that responsibility. And fourth is individuals who are experienced in the task, comfortable with that, and fully capable of achieving that goal. So they're essentially self-reliant. So once you diagnose these four particular situations, it will, modify or allow you to tune your management in that particular situation. So if we go to the next slide, we see that, then based on the situation, you have the appropriate style. So in the first case with the enthusiastic beginner, if you recognize that's the situation, your goal as a manager is to provide the structure, the direction, the teaching, and then, fairly closely monitor them to make sure that they're successful because they're learning the skills to actually do the position, and you want them to be able to be successful. I like the quotes which are around this. They're kind of helpful in understanding the difference of approaches. So in the first one, the directing approach in the bottom right, ultimately it's kind of saying, I'll decide. You're doing pretty direct management in that case because they're just simply not capable of doing the task at this point, even though they want to do it. So they need more of that. I'd hesitate to call it micromanaging, but they need a lot of management in that situation. The second one, for what they call the disillusioned learner, who is able but not motivated to do it, what you really should do is, in that particular situation, listen to what their issues are, explain the importance of the goal, make sure that they really understand it, and involve them in the resolution. So the quote is, let's talk about it, and then ultimately I decide. You're still driving the action, so to speak, in this particular case. In the third case, which is the supporting for the cautious contributor, you should again ask for their input and encourage them and offer your support in resolving the issues, but you're less directing them at this point. They're capable at this point. You're just being the sounding board, and you're saying, let's talk, and then you decide how best to accomplish this goal. And the last case, which is yet a different management style, when you have somebody that's completely self-reliant, who's capable and motivated, it's more about acknowledging them and providing them the autonomy and additional motivation, not only just to do the job, but to continue to innovate, continue to learn in that area, maybe teach in that area, quite different than the micromanaging, so to speak, in the first situation, the S1 case. So I also point out, I think it was interesting in this particular work that they say that, a single individual may be in a different situation with respect to the goals. If they have 3 to 5 goals, they may be very self-reliant in one particular goal, but they may need directing in another goal. So I just found it in my time of managing people to recognize that people are different, and even within the different goals they may have a different come from, and the best results come from adapting your management style to what that individual needs. Okay, the last topic we wanted to kind of cover off before we move on to taking questions is you just can't really conclude without emphasizing the importance of satisfaction and retention and getting the most out of your team. Maybe somewhat obvious, but getting good people that match your culture, are aligned, and are part of highly functioning teams are critical to your success. So once you have them, you want to make sure that you keep them. And although people often quickly think of monetary compensation as a way to keep your people around, the real keys to satisfaction and retention are, first of all, meaningful work. It's actually cited as the most common reason for people staying in their jobs is that they feel like they have meaningful work to do. And your responsibility as a manager or your managers within your organization should have an active role in having that dialogue that makes sure that the employees feel like they have meaningful work to do. Secondly, that there's personal growth opportunities. People want to feel challenged, not overwhelmed, but feel like they're growing, feel like they're thriving. So again, as part of the management responsibility of the individuals within the teams is to make sure that they feel like they have opportunities to grow. And then the last thing we'll put a plug in for is don't forget to focus on what actually makes their work and their lives easier. For instance, build and refine your processes and systems so that those repetitive things that they need to do are easy to do. Develop checklists, reminders, so that those, I won't say menial tasks, but the routine tasks become easier over time so they can focus on their more challenging activities and more challenging goals. And finally, just their lives themselves. As an example, you can create a bulletin board service within your organization for local services like child care. The easier it is for them to live the rest of their lives, the easier it is to create bandwidth that they can focus on the tasks at hand as being part of your organization and not be unnecessarily distracted with things that are difficult in other aspects of their life. And then last but not least, make yourself accountable to your employee satisfaction. Use employee satisfaction surveys, have a complaint or suggestion box where employees can contribute and provide feedback to you, measure and report on the turnover in your organization, and conduct exit reviews to assess what you could have done different or better to retain the employees. Okay, so that's pretty much it. If we were going to kind of sum this up for how to get the most out of your team, just to reiterate, establish a strong and positive culture, gain alignment in some of the ways that we've suggested, and then manage your teams so that they're not dysfunctional but highly functional teams, and use situational leadership in your management of those individuals within those teams. All right, so let's make sure we have a little bit of time to get to questions here. The question about will this PowerPoint be available? I know that these are recorded and the recordings are made available afterwards, but I don't know that CSIA makes the slides themselves available. So if that's something that you're interested in, you should probably follow up with us directly. Okay. Karen had a question about, I think your question started with why does Sally have only minuses with respect to her scoring in the people analyzer? That would tend to indicate that she does not have, for whatever reason, the core values of the company. As far as your second question with respect to what techniques do we use during interviews to ensure that someone wants to carry out the responsibilities of the position, and Steve, feel free to chime in on this, but I certainly advocate doing interviews that are not only skill-based but behavioral-based. And by behavioral-based, I mean you should interview for the core values that you have within your organization when you're trying to find in the people. Ask them for times when they've exhibited some certain characteristic and let them explain that to you. I know I can think of an instance where perseverance in a previous group that I worked on was important. And actually the way that we would interview for that was we would give them a task, quite frankly, that was not easy to solve, certainly within time constraints. And it was more about seeing how they reacted to the situation of not being able to solve the problem in short order than it was their technical ability to solve the problem itself. Steve, do you have any other thoughts on interviewing?
Yeah, I certainly echo that exact point. The point of setting a test or asking even difficult questions is not as much about the specific answer that comes back to you. It's much more about the response of the candidate. Do they appear to work well under stress? Can they cope with change? Can they help build the organization that they're going to become part of or are they going to be neutral or worst case, an actual drag on your culture and on your performance? So, yeah, I certainly think that. And so something that's not obvious, but in the chat box, not everybody can see the question. So Karen's original question was, how can we conduct interviews to ensure that someone actually wants to carry out the responsibilities? So that's the key point, is to make sure that you're not focused on can they program in C or do they understand Allen Bradley Model X PLCs. You know, those skills can be taught. But when it comes to people management, think about the person, think about the background, think about the outlook on work and their capacity to help you build great teams within your company. Those are the questions. And Karen had a follow-up set of questions around her experience has been that those are not always applied equally. Depending on the candidate who was applying for the job, that there's some managers who are perhaps not very skillful, and they're applying different criteria to different candidates coming in for a position. And that's certainly a reality. Is, you know, not all of us as managers are perfectly skillful, and so that's a management and leadership issue within the organization itself. Do you have a hiring process? Do you actually train people how to do interviews? Do you have accountability where when you see someone behaving differently towards different groups or different, I'll call them subsets of the population, you know, when you see different behaviors, you have to address that as a management topic. That's not an interview topic, that's a management topic. And so, you know, as part of building an effective leadership team, those are the topics that have to be worked on.
All right. Want to allow for other questions on other subject areas if need be.
I could just fill in
right.
the quiet time there with Jack. Let's just have 1 minute on younger folks within the organization. We often hear questions from people: how do I deal effectively with all these young folks who don't seem to want to work the same way as the older folks, our grandfathers worked? And I think the quickest summary for that is think about the spectrum for between machines, employees, and owners. As a culture and as a set of organizations, we don't have the commitment to employees that organizations had 20 years ago or 50 years ago. And so it's not surprising that some of the younger folks, if we broadly use the term millennials, I don't want to be that simplistic, but you know, if we don't treat those people like owners, they aren't going to act like owners. And so that's just a quick tidbit, I would say. Think about how you're really treating those younger people, and are you demonstrating the commitment of an owner? And then you'll get them. There's some tremendously enthusiastic, skilled, smart young folks out there, and they can be very effective contributors.
All right. Well, if there aren't any other questions, on behalf of XOTech, Steve and I in particular, we want to thank you for sharing this time with us. We tried to cover as much ground as we could, give you good source material if it's of interest there to you and you want to just kind of self-help and get some of the recommended books and take a look at it. That'd be great. If you'd like to engage Steve or I further, you can reach out to us at our email addresses here at XOTech.com, and we'll be happy to explore how XOTech can best support you to overcome whatever business challenges you have and achieve your company's goals.
Yes, it looks like you did a wonderful job. Thank you so much. You're getting thank yous sent in. And on behalf of CSIA, I would like to thank Jack and Steve for this informative discussion. I'd also like to thank all of those attending. We hope you found the webinar informational. When you close out of this webinar, a link will pop up to a brief evaluation. We would appreciate it if you would take a moment to share your feedback with us. We'd also like to remind you that a recording of this webinar will be available for viewing within 30 days of this event. Please visit the CSIA website to view this recording or a past webinar you may have missed. This concludes our program for today. Once again, thank you for joining us and have a good afternoon.